All right, guys, today we're continuing our stock up, stock down, buy low, buy high series, whatever you want to call it. And last week we talked about wide receivers that I'm really high on, that I think the value is just going to skyrocket and guys you should be buying in on early in the offseason. Today we got to talk about the saltier side of fantasy, basically the inverse of that. Guys that are just really overpriced when it comes to current ADP and current value in the market, and their price and value is probably going to fall faster than the ball in Times Square on New Year's Eve in New York. But now that I think about it, that ball actually doesn't fall that quickly. It takes about a minute to go all the way down to the bottom, but you get the gist of the metaphor. So as always, like the video, comment down below on your buy low, buy high wide receiver. Subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you on the other side of that intro. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football. Today, we're going to be talking about wide receivers that I think are just a little bit too overpriced. And in Dynasty, you guys should be selling for the value that they currently represent at this moment, or just guys in redraft. When you're looking to draft, don't fall for their current ADP. Maybe let someone else pick up those landmines in the draft. I know this episode is going to be not as fun as last weeks, because last week we talked about guys that I'm really excited about, really passionate about, and it's fun to talk about the upside of fantasy, and it's a little bit less fun to talk about the downside of fantasy. But I got to make you guys aware of these 7 wide receivers that I'm really out on for the 2023 fantasy season. So let's get into it. And the first one we're going to talk about, it's kind of a combination here. We want to talk about both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I'll put up Mike Evans here just so you guys have a nice little graphic in the background while I talk. But I really want to talk about the wide receiver core in Tampa Bay as a whole. First off, these are guys that are a little bit older in age when it comes to Mike Evans and both Chris Godwin, rapidly approaching that quote-unquote cliff when it comes to fantasy production. Despite, wide receivers have a little bit more longevity in fantasy, but these are guys that have been around for quite a while and just have a lot of wear and tear on the tires, and, that fall-off could be coming sooner rather than later. They're also stuck in Tampa Bay, which is a team that is rapidly on the decline, and honestly facing, after letting go of Tom Brady last season and letting go of a lot of, aging veterans this past offseason, they're a team that's rapidly on the decline and heading towards a massive rebuild. And frankly, both, primarily Mike Evans, but also Chris Godwin, could probably be moved here in the near future. Todd Bowles is the current coach. I don't know how long of leash he has left there, and it could be a situation in Tampa Bay where they clean house after this season and just start rebuilding from the ground up, whether it's with Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison, and many of the touted prospects of the 2024 class. So I'm trying to get out on Chris Godwin and Mike Evans before that teardown happens. Right now, they're still in Tampa Bay, and as long as they have that Buccaneer flag on their chest, they'll still have some of that, nostalgic value that they've been able to provide to your fantasy teams for the past 4 to 5 years, but they could be easily moved during this season, next off season, to a situation that's much, much less valuable for their production. Also, even if they do stay in Tampa Bay, how much confidence do you really have in Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask to really lead a competent passing offense? Very, very little in my opinion. Also, this is a team of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that under Tom Brady, they passed the ball an insane amount. I believe it was 738 passing attempts this past season, which obviously is going to be good for wide receivers, but there are only 11 teams in the NFL last year that had over 500 passing attempts. I don't think with Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask under center this season for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it's going to even remotely lend itself to nearly the prolific passing game that there was in Tampa Bay when Tom Brady was there. And I think reaching that 500 passing attempt mark is going to be quite the challenge, even in a very weak NFC South. So I just think the quarterback situation for all these guys, the impending rebuild that's going to be taking place in Tampa Bay, and just the overall, just the vibe of the team means that these are guys that I'm probably trying to sell on right now to a contending team, and just trying to reap as much value as I possibly can before they really do hit that cliff. So just a brief touch point there on the Tampa Bay wide receivers. Moving on to Kadarius Toney, is another guy that I say is going to be a sell high candidate. There's so much upward trajectory for Kadarius Toney, and we'll kind of run through all the things that, make people really value him highly for fantasy football. Former first-round pick of the New York Giants. He's also tied to the best quarterback in the game in Patrick Mahomes. I don't think that's arguable at this point. I think Patrick Mahomes is the undisputed number one quarterback. And any wide receiver tied to him is going to get, a bump that's probably unwarranted. They added Rashee Rice in the second round of the NFL draft this past season, but they also lost Mecole Hardman and Juju Smith-Schuster, so it's not like they're adding Rashee Rice to a crowded wide receiver room. They did make way for vacated targets to add Rashee Rice and potentially increase Kadarius Toney's percentage of the passing targets. And also there's a ton of hype in this offseason that I think is just artificially inflating Kadarius Toney's value, saying that he could potentially be slotted in as a wide receiver one of the Kansas City Chiefs and has the potential to be that guy in 2023. So despite all those things trending up for Kadarius Toney, let's talk about why I still think he is a sell high candidate and a guy that you should be moving off of your dynasty rosters, or even when it comes to redraft, someone that you should not be drafting at the current ADP. We all know in Kansas City that Travis Kelce is the main pass catching weapon of that offense, despite not being a wide receiver. He's a tight end, but he's buddy BFFs with Patrick Mahomes. We've seen their relationship on the New Heights show with Jason and Travis. And just historically, he is Patrick Mahomes' favorite target. And also I want to harken back to a tweet that I made last offseason where I predicted that Patrick Mahomes will still have an amazing quarterback year, passing for well over 4,000 yards, but not a single wide receiver on the Chiefs would get over 600 yards. And why it did not come to fruition because Juju had 800 yards receiving. I still think in spirit, the tweet was right. And I went out and described how I would process that this would happen, that there'd be equal passing attempts between MVS, Mecole, Juju Smith-Schuster, also getting some of the pass-catching running backs involved, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jerick McKinnon. And obviously, Travis Kelce would have well over 1,000 yards, and they do have two other tight ends in Noah Gray and Blake Bell that they look to heavily utilize in the passing game as well, and should get a fair share of the targets. So all this goes to show, based on projections and the historical trends of the Kansas City Chiefs, that despite Patrick Mahomes having an incredible season for quarterbacks year over year, it just doesn't really lend itself to a true wide receiver one for fantasy. And also, Kadarius Toney, his injury history is longer than a CVS receipt, harkening back to his time with the Giants, missing well over the games that he was on the roster for, as well as missing a ton of time in Kansas City as well. He's just a guy that just doesn't seem to stay on the field, and we all know the best ability is availability, and he can't really generate fantasy points for your team if he's not in the field and injured. Also, he's going with the hype. I talked about this earlier where he's projected number one wide receiver. The Chiefs brass and Andy Reid think he can step up in that wide receiver one role for them. He's getting the Kansas City bump. The Kansas City bump is a real thing. It's why Rashee Rice is being driven up into the second round of rookie drafts in Dynasty, which I think is wildly overpriced for Rashee Rice. But anyone tied to Patrick Mahomes is going to get that bump, but then never actually yield that production when it comes to on-field play. So with that Kansas City bump and all those things, I think you should try to capitalize on his value right now where it's never been higher. Moving on to another guy that, is a product of a ton of off-season hype. Typing is hard. Hold on. Darnell Mooney, wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. This guy was, again, another tremendous wide receiver, had a great rookie campaign despite being, I believe, a sixth round or a day 3 pick, comes in, and Justin Fields, as he takes that jump last year, obviously had a slow start, but also managed to find some production towards the end as Justin Fields developed as a passer. But I really am out on Darnell Mooney, and with all the offseason hype around, bringing in DJ Moore, bringing in so many assets, they drafted better offensive line protection. They got rid of a ton of defensive assets, so it's going to be, a very amenable situation for fantasy where it's a high-powered offense coupled with a pretty bad defense letting up a ton of points, so they'll have to pass a lot. So there's a lot of hype around the Chicago Bears offensive assets this season, but I just don't think Darnell Mooney in particular is going to yield the current value that he's being projected as. Again, hype of Justin Fields, he is projected, when you look at Darnell Mooney, DJ Moore, a lot of these assets, Cole Kmet, they're projecting a jump in Justin Fields to make that leap as a passer, but we know that he still wasn't, an elite passer of the football, wildly inaccurate, and he got a lot of his fantasy production down the stretch of the 2022 season when it came to running the ball. So I'm not as sold as Justin Fields' leap as a passer and his accuracy. I kind of want to see it before I believe it. The more logical take would be that he doesn't make that leap as a passer. I mean, Josh Allen did, but Josh Allen is an outlier in a vast sample size of toolsy athletic quarterbacks. Was really the only one to make that leap to become a really elite passer. And I think the odds are stacked against Justin Fields to lead a very successful passing offense. Also, we know historically that rushing quarterbacks, they take away a lot when it comes to downfield passing. Guys like Darnell Mooney, who make a lot of their money down the field running deep routes, it takes time for those routes to develop. And when we see, we saw investment from Chicago in offseason, as well as drafting Darnell Wright to strengthen that offensive line, but it's still not an offensive line that I think is going to be in the top half of the NFL. And I think Justin Fields will still be under pressure. What happens when a rushing quarterback feels pressure in the pocket? Well, he's going to look to escape and look to scramble. So a lot of the routes that Darnell Mooney is going to be running really won't develop, and there won't be time for him to create separation and have Justin Fields go through his progression, and he finds Darnell Mooney for a lot of those deep scores, which is where Darnell can make a lot of his fantasy production. Also, DJ Moore comes in as a much, much more talented wide receiver. And as far as we've talked about a lot of the woes I have around the Chicago passing game, I think DJ Moore will be, the top target by far and away none, but it's still, this is an argument that we harken back to with, Rashad Bateman last year, where yes, Rashad Bateman certainly has a huge portion of the pie. He'll get 25% of the targets. That's obviously a wildly high number, but we're simplifying it for this argument, but he'll get a decent portion of the passing offense in a rationally good passing, an offense that's rationally good as a passer. But when you start reducing a lot of those passing attempts to sub 20 pass attempts per game, well, that 20% target share starts looking very, very poorly. And take a look at Drake London last year, who had the highest passing, highest target share of any rookie wide receiver last year. But when Marcus Mariota was only passing 16, 15 times a game, really didn't generate much fantasy production for Drake London. And I think that's going to be quite a bit similar case when it comes to Darnell Mooney, where, there will be a very limited passing pie to go around, and the bulk of it's going to go to either Cole Kmet or DJ Moore. And despite Darnell Mooney getting what's projected a high target share, and truthfully, it's only going to be about 3 to 4 targets per game. It's going to be very, very hard for him to capitalize on those for fantasy production. And I just want to reiterate, this is going to be a rushing-based offense in Chicago. Obviously, Justin Fields is much more dynamic as a runner than a passer. You have Khalil Herbert as the running back one. They made significant draft capital. I think, personally, high 4th round is significant draft capital when it comes to a running back. And they drafted Roschon Johnson, who I think they're expected to come in and help with the rushing offense. So I believe that a lot of the plays is going to be skewed towards the running game. And again, just will ultimately result in a smaller number of pass attempts for Darnell Mooney to capitalize. And I'm kind of fading many pass catchers in the Chicago offense based on it being predominantly run heavy. Now let's move on to some really, really spicy takes here. All right, I can feel people just, shutting off this video, turning away, saying I have no idea what I'm talking about, that I'm a horrible fantasy analyst, but just hear me out, please. There's another Dynasty channel, Dynasty Rewind, that I like a lot, and one of their mantras that has stuck with me is, I don't hate players, hate their values. Listen, I love Jalen Waddle. I was in on him as a rookie. I drafted him in the 10th, 9th rounds when he was a rookie. He really helped me, make some pushes towards the end of the year when he became very involved in that offense. Jalen Waddle is insanely talented, and he will be an insanely good wide receiver. I'm not saying that he's not a good wide receiver. I just think the way he's valued is just way too high. Let me reiterate that. I love Waddle. He's probably one of my favorite wide receivers in the NFL. Probably my favorite wide receiver to watch behind DK Metcalf, frankly. I cannot stress how much I love Jalen Waddle. I just think the value in Dynasty right now is just exorbitant for what he actually will produce on the field. I mean, he's an insanely volatile player. Let's just go look historically at 2022, 30... 17, 40, 15, 5, 16, 12, 30, 19, 10, 13, 1, 20, 28. I mean, it's just, it's very frustrating when you have to roster a player that is just as volatile as Jalen Waddle, especially you're not playing best ball. You're playing a league where you have to confidently start your players week in and week out. And if he does have one of those 4-point, 1-point games, it's really going to submarine your entire week. So just the volatility is the first major concern that I have with Jalen Waddle. Also, he's still going to be the number 2 to Tyreek Hill. And I understand people are like, oh, Jalen Waddle to the moon when they heard Tyreek Hill is going to retire. But he says he's going to retire after 2025. We still have the 2023 season, still have the 2024 season, and the 2025 season. There's still 3 more seasons of Tyreek Hill. I think it's far more outblown than people are making it to be, because that's not, they're like, wow, why would Tyreek retire so early? He's not retiring that early. It's not egregious for him to play 3 more years in the NFL. So over that 3-year period, Jalen Waddle will have some of his upside capped, still being the number 2 option behind Tyreek Hill. Even if Tyreek Hill doesn't fully, play out that contract, if he's somehow let go, his contract should be easy to cut or move on from after the 2024 season. But that's still 2 more seasons of Jalen Waddle being the number 2 wide receiver in this offense, and he's being valued as a number 1, which I just not a big fan of right now, as long as Tyreek's still there. Great wide receiver, is capped as the number 2 wide receiver. Same conversation. That's why we don't see T. Higgins jumping into the top 12 wide receivers. We don't see Devonta Smith jumping into the top 12 wide receivers, just because they're not the true alphas of their offense. And now we get to my major problem. I could deal with the volatility of Jalen Waddle, because even though he's volatile, he still puts up these monster games, and he does it consistently enough to where it's not debilitating you every single week. And I could live with him being a number 2 wide receiver. We've still seen wide receiver 2s be productive for fantasy, whether it's Chris Godwin a few years ago, or Devonta Smith last year, or T. Higgins 2 years ago. But my major concern is Tua's health. Tua, we know, has had tremendous issues with concussions and staying on the field at injury history, and just really hasn't played a full NFL season to date. We even heard him talking about considering retirement this offseason, while he thought, it'd be best for his family to come back and play this year. The fact that he was considering retirement was a, excuse me, it's a major issue. And why is that a major issue? Because when Tua's not on the field, Jalen Waddle's average fantasy production was right around 4 points. Yes, you heard me right. Whenever it was Teddy Bridgewater or Skylar Thompson, I believe, was their third string quarterback, whenever he was on their field, Jalen Waddle's production absolutely plummeted. So averaging 4 points per game, not something I want out of a wide receiver who's being drafted as a wide receiver 1 right now. As you can see, currently wide receiver 8 in PPR. So the fact that there's a very high likelihood that Tua doesn't remain on the field is going to absolutely obliterate Jalen Waddle's value whenever Tua inevitably suffers another concussion or suffers another injury. Also, it's important to note that in this offseason, the Dolphins picked up Tua's 5th-year option, which means that if there's more issues with Tua this year when it comes to concussions, whether it comes to injury, they could potentially be moving off of Tua next season. Despite the great season that Tua had, Miami Dolphins have shown that they're not totally tied to him as a quarterback. They tried to bring in Deshaun Watson. They were, they got penalized. They lost their first round pick in 23 for looking into bringing in Tom Brady. So just a lot of uncertainty around the quarterback position going forward gives me tremendous concern for Jalen Waddle, because all of his upside games, well, they happen with Tua on the field as a prolific passer. And frankly, for a guy that has that many concerns around him, and you can turn him around for 2 first-round picks plus a reasonable fantasy asset. I mean, I could see him going for Deontay Johnson plus 2024 first and 2025 first. That's really good value. That is really good value. And as much as I hate to say it, Jalen Waddle is a guy that you need to be fielding offers for, and if someone blows you away, I'd be absolutely hitting that trade accept button. All right, moving on, continuing the hate. If you didn't hate me for that one, you'll definitely hate me for this one. And I want you to think that I don't sit here on my high horse behind this camera, behind this ring light and microphone and say, do as I say, not as I do, because I moved off of Garrett Wilson this offseason, actually about 3 days ago. So go to my Twitter, at Twin Takes FF. It'll be linked it'll be shown in the description below. Go there. I posted the trade that I made shipping off Garrett Wilson for the 108 this year, a first round next year, and Jordan Love. And I just think that the value that you can get for Garrett Wilson after one better than average rookie season is tremendous, and that's why I'm moving off of him. Not only is the value great for Garrett Wilson, there's a lot of things that I have when it comes to his concern around his production. A lot of people are going off of it. And listen, I get it that I am in the minority on the Garrett Wilson hate here, but just hear out my argument. A lot of people think that Aaron Rodgers coming in, this offense is going to be absolutely incredible, going to lead them to being a top 5 offense, and Garrett Wilson's going to be, his Devontae Adams. Well, I'm not so sold on that. I really don't like Rodgers. First off, he's just a weirdo. Getting past personal discrepancies or disagreements that I have with Aaron Rodgers, he could retire in 1 year. I mean, this could be a guy that, listen, if he does turn into Devontae Adams, great, but you never know. This is a guy that's flirted with retirement the past 3 off seasons, and Aaron Rodgers, if he doesn't have a great season this year, he could just right off into the sunset. And where are you? Your left back was Zach Wilson or another rookie quarterback, and that's a lot of uncertainty around the quarterback position that I have in an organization that, frankly, does not give me a lot of confidence in the Jets that have been mediocre for about 60 years. Also, Rodgers, he really historically doesn't gel with first-year wide receivers. We saw it took a while for him to be comfortable with Christian Watson last year. We saw how long it took for him to be comfortable with Devontae Adams in Green Bay about 6 or 7 years ago. So, historically, this is a guy that he needs to build trust with his wide receivers, and I don't think he's going to hit the ground running with Garrett Wilson despite all the hype coming out of OTAs in the offseason. He also brought in his little cronies. I know that they came out and Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas came out and said that Rodgers didn't give him a wish list, but, Occam's razor, what was more likely? They didn't bring in Alan Lazard and who is it? Not Randall Cunningham. Randall Cobb. They didn't bring in Randall Cobb and Alan Lazard just for the heck of it. They didn't think there were going to be major upgrades to this wide receiver room. They brought him in to help entice Aaron Rodgers. And listen, Aaron Rodgers has a relationship with Randall Cobb. He has a relationship with Alan Lazard. And just the way that Aaron Rodgers works, he's going to want to get those guys involved. He wants to get them involved in the passing game. So you'll know that even though Garrett Wilson will be open, he will probably be partially looking towards Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb throughout the season, and it's going to eat away at Garrett Wilson until he truly develops that rapport with Aaron Rodgers, which I'm, again, not entirely certain comes to fruition. The other thing is that Garrett Wilson is a great wide receiver, but I don't think that a touchdown upside is going to happen for him this year in New York for a multitude of reasons. One, Aaron Rodgers has one of the highest percentages of tight end targets in the red zone. We saw this multiple times in Green Bay, and I think the fact that they brought in Tucker Kraft, they still have CJ Uzomah under contract, both really athletic, big-body tight ends. I think that's where Aaron Rodgers could be leaning to go to in the end zone over a 6-foot, 190-pound wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. So I don't think he's going to be getting the vast majority of red zone target share. Plus, this is an offense in the Jets that, they have Breece Hall coming back from the ACL injury. They still have Michael Carter under contract, and they went out and invested pretty significant draft capital in Izzy Abanikanda. So when it comes to the goal line, it feels like there's going to be a lot of rushing attempts, and a lot of those touchdowns are going to be headed off to the running back position. So that's something we can also talk about here, is that this is a Robert Saleh-led team that comes from the Kyle Shanahan system in San Francisco that is really, really running back heavy. And those guys that I just mentioned in Hall, Abanikanda, and Carter are really going to lead a 3-headed monster in this running back committee. That's going to eat into a lot of the passing game. So I think people are going to be very frustrated with how many touchdowns go to the running back position and how much of the offensive snap split is split between the passing game and the running back game, with how good Breece Hall was prior to injury and bringing in high draft capital in a guy like Izzy Abanikanda. So a lot of those things just lead me to believe that Garrett Wilson, way too much volatility around the quarterback position, around the run first offense and dynamic that they have. And also, this is a really, really tough division that they play in. I mean, they're going up against a historically good defense in the Patriots, and they brought in Christian Gonzalez as their number 1 draft pick this past year to pair with Marcus Jones and Jack Jones, who's already a pretty solid secondary. You're dealing with a decent secondary and the Buffalo Bills, and also the Miami Dolphins. In addition to having Javon Holland, they brought in Jalen Ramsey from the Rams. So this is just an insanely tough division in the AFC East, and a lot of these really fast, strong cornerbacks are going to be guarding Garrett Wilson, and it should genuinely stymie his production quite a bit. Not to mention that, the strength of the Jets team, while they did bring in Aaron Rodgers to bolster the offense, It is a defensive team. They have Quinnen Williams, who's close to a contract extension right now. They have the best cornerback in the game in Sauce Gardner. I mean, they're going to win a lot of the games are low scoring. They are one of the lower scoring teams in the NFL in 2022. And I believe that, they're not going to be looking to really run up the score with a passing offense. It's going to be a perfect situation of Aaron Rodgers being a game manager, running the ball a lot, and winning games based on really good defense. And it's really going to, limit the ceiling on Garrett Wilson's upside. All that being said, if you can trade him for 2 first-round picks plus, I'm all over it. It's not that I hate Garrett Wilson. I think he's a tremendously talented player. I don't hate the player. I hate the value. And right now, just with the insane offseason hype around Aaron Rodgers coming in and his rookie year, just the value they can get for Garrett Wilson as people project him to be the next Devontae Adams is tremendous. And like I said, this is actionable advice that I do myself. So go check me out at Twin Takes FF and look at the trade I just made when I shipped away Garrett Wilson. So moving on, we got 2 more wide receivers that I really want to talk about here before we jump. First off is going to be a veteran that I think, still has a ton of value, but you can really parlay that into better value for your team. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to turn value on your roster in these guys that are overvalued into more actionable value and more achievable and value that has more achievable production. So Keenan Allen, this man is 31. He's far and away on the wrong side of 30, and his injury history is agreeing with us on that. He missed a vast majority of the season. I believe he missed 13 games last season, 11 or 13 games, right around there, at least 10 games. So again, as we mentioned, quite a bit here. The best ability is availability, and it seems like Keenan Allen no longer will be having that ability. He had a good stretch run of 3 years where he was able to stay on the field, but even in his early career, he had quite a bit of issues with injuries and staying on the field. And, we've seen the investment in the Los Angeles Chargers to go ahead and get younger. They drafted Quentin Johnston hopefully making him the new X wide receiver, really one of the true only X wide receiver profiles, being 6'4", 215 pounds in the 2023 draft class. And I think while they try to phase Keenan Allen out, Quentin Johnston's the guy that they could be trying phasing in and taking over that kind of X wide receiver position. And I mean, you can still get a ton of value for Keenan Allen because he is a hot fantasy name. He's a guy that, has been around as a wide receiver 10, 11, 12 for multiple years now. People still think that there's production left in him, still tied to Justin Herbert, who's one of the up-and-coming quarterbacks and perennially viewed as a top 6, top 5 quarterback. But I just don't think, with the injury history, with their investment in moving younger at the wide receiver position, Keenan Allen's days are numbered, and while he might have some production this year, if he can stay healthy, better to move on from him now, and then instead of being left holding the bag next offseason. Last guy I want to talk about, and honestly, I'm talking about this because I want to feel validated, because I was so out on this guy last year, took so much hate for it, took so much heat for saying Gabe Davis is not the guy that you think he is. He's not the guy that you're going to get projected. And I'm not going to dive into all the reasonings behind why I didn't like Gabe Davis last year. But if you didn't move off from him last year with the tremendous offseason hype he was getting then, move off from him now. You're not going to get the value that you got from him last year, but this year you should definitely be looking to transform him into more consistent, reliable fantasy production. Frankly, because last year he proved he wasn't the guy. He proved he wasn't the, wide receiver 2 that could be consistently good game in and game out. We see, we talked about volatility with Jalen Waddle. Gabe Davis is even more volatile. 18, 6, 2, 32, 16, 5, 5, 21, 11, 7, 9, 6. It's just not the volatility you're looking at. Again, best ball, maybe a little bit higher on, but, in a league where you have to actively set your lineup and predict fantasy production each and every week, Gabe Davis was more of a migraine than he was a benefit to your team last year. And I think a lot of the offseason activity from the Buffalo Bills has also corroborated what we think is that he didn't prove last year that he was the guy. They brought in Dalton Kincaid, obviously at the tight end position, but, all the rumors coming out of OTAs is that he's not really going to come in and be a true tight end. They have Dawson Knox, who they signed to a 4-year agreement last offseason and is still an integral part of this offense. He's going to be their blocking, do-it-all tight end. Dalton Kincaid is going to come in as a prospect out of Utah and be that pass-catching option for them, and really going to be eating into Gabe Davis's targets as a more reliable number 2 pass catcher in this offense. So right now, I think it's not anyone for Gabe Davis, he's not really someone that can bring reliable production to your roster. And I think as we go on throughout this offseason, as we go on into next offseason, we're going to see the Bills try to bolster their pass catching game outside of Gabe Davis. I don't think right now there's been whispers that he's not in line to receive a contract extension from the Buffalo Bills, which obviously is not good for, their long-term use or view of Gabe Davis. So obviously bringing in Dalton Kincaid this year, I don't think Justin Shorter is really any detriment to Gabe Davis, but I could certainly see next year them adding, a top end pass catching prospect as Stephon Diggs continues to age and as Gabe Davis may be phased out more of the offense. So before you are left completely holding the bag on Gabe Davis, I would recommend moving off from him and also just moving on for the sake of your mental sanity and dealing with this insane boomer bust prospect week in and week out for 17 weeks in fantasy football. So that's going to wrap up my video here. These are all guys that, I think are overvalued to some degree, and I think you can find better value in either younger assets or maybe even veterans or draft capital. And I've tried to give you some examples of what to move them for, especially the hotter takes in Waddle and Wilson. And just to recap, as we did with the buy low guys, first off, any of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers, just because, the insane rebuild that Tampa Bay is facing in the very, very near future. Kadarius Toney, due to injury history and the Kansas City bump that never really actually yields any production from the wide receiver position. Darnell Mooney with the hype of the offseason, with the Justin Fields jump this offseason, but also it's primarily just going to be a huge run first and run heavy offense. Jalen Waddle and Garrett Wilson, we can rope them into hate the value, not the player, because I love them personally as players. I just think there's a lot of question marks around not only their situation, but the quarterbacks that each are tied to, and the value you can get for them right now is just absolutely insane. Keenan Allen, just an aging veteran that's going to be phased out of the offense here real soon. And Gabe Davis, just a volatile guy that the offseason activity of the Buffalo Bills indicates to me that he's not part of their future plans. So as always, let me know. You can let me know down in the comments whether you agree or disagree, or other wide receivers you think are sell high. You can also interact with me on Twitter. Plug that quite a few times this video at TwinTakesFF, also in the description down below. And looking forward to continuing this. That's going to wrap up buy low, buy high wide receivers, moving into our next position, which will be a surprise next week. Take care, guys.